Alright guys, BLM here, we're back with a new video. In this video I'll be talking about some of my favorite tribal councils in international Survivor history. So just to get this out of the way, this video will spoil certain seasons of International Survivor, with those being all of the Channel 10 revival seasons of Australian Survivor, Season 2 of Survivor New Zealand, and Season 6 of Survivor South Africa. Now these are my personal choices, and I prefer tribals that have some really interesting gameplay, so most of these will include some blindsides, but I also tried to pick those that had some intrigue before the vote as well. Though to be honest, those two things don't necessarily correlate all the time. There were a couple tribals from seasons 1 and 5 of South Africa that I did consider mentioning here, but I felt like the editing on those tribals were a bit slow. And also the vote outs themselves didn't have the gravitas of these more modern seasons, despite the strategy behind them being really interesting. So those did not end up making the cut. Okay, so originally I was going to do this in chronological order, but I felt like it was much more interesting to do this as a ranking video, so yeah, we're going to have 10 tribal councils here. And to be honest, these rankings might be a bit arbitrary, but whatever. Let's get started with number 10. So number 10 for me is the only tribal here from Survivor New Zealand, and that is the Matt blindside in the final 6 of Survivor New Zealand, Thailand. And it was between this and the Brad blindside. Both of them include people blindsided with idols in their pockets, but this one had an extra layer added to it in the sense of Dave flipping against his childhood friend. The reason why this is so low on the list, though, is kind of similar to the ones I mentioned earlier, where it's mostly the presentation of it. The pacing is a bit slow, and as it is always with Survivor New Zealand. And I feel like from a basic tribal standpoint, if you were to watch this tribal on its own, it's not as good as some of these future tribals. So knowing the context of what's going on here, it makes this tribal a lot more interesting. So the context here is fantastic. I mean, at this point in the game, Matt is the dominant player in this game. He has an idol in his pocket that he found with his closest ally, Lisa, but Lisa knew that she wasn't going to win against him, and she was starting to run out of numbers in the game to get rid of him, so she was able to get Tara to vote with her, but that's only 2 people, and she couldn't risk telling Adam and Tess about the plan, as they might have told Matt, and he could obviously just play his idol. So her only shot left in the game was Dave, who unknowingly to her was Matt's childhood friend, but she is able to convince Dave to flip his vote and blindside Matt in a 3-2 to 1 vote, where Matt and Adam were thinking Tess was the target, meaning Matt is blindsided, 1 by his childhood friend, 2nd by a 3-2 1 vote, 3rd with an idol in his pocket. Now we're moving on to number 9. We have our first tribal here from Survivor South Africa, Philippines, and that is the final 5 vote, where Katinka is blindsided after an idol play from Werner. This is another one with a fantastic vote. The tribal itself is just it's okay. It's nothing really to write home about, though the pacing is definitely better than that of Survivor New Zealand. But the vote here is fantastic. I mean, Werner at this point is playing one of the most dominant games in probably the history of Survivor. But he does start to get targeted here by Annalise and Katinka, who used to be his really close allies. However, everyone knows that Werner has an idol, so everyone's expecting him to play it at this tribal council, considering this is the last time he can play it. So no one ends up voting for him. So because of this, Annalise and Katinka decide to wait 1 round till the final 4, but because of that, they'll need to get Tom on board, who has 1 immunity. So they decide to tell Tom the plan, which leads to Tom, who is close to Werner at that point, telling Werner about the plan. So Werner sides with Tom and puts their votes on Katinka, allowing Werner to play his idol on Jean, the person that everyone was voting for, making Katinka go home in a 2-1-0 vote, which is somewhat similar to what Natalie Anderson was able to do in Survivor San Juan del Sur at the final 5 as well. It was really fun to see it play out. Now we're moving on to number 8, where we have our first tribal from Australian Survivor 2016, with that being the first tribal after the 2nd swap, where Rowan goes home. Now, at first, I was actually leaning towards putting the Craig boot on here. The Craig boot is a more shocking boot, as I remember being really surprised that and disappointed that Craig was taken out so early. But I do feel like once you take the context into it, and also because this was the first battle between the Aganoans and the Vavau people, that would pretty much comprise the rest of this pre-merge, I felt like this was the one that had to be on the list. So coming into this tribal, we had a 5-4 majority from the Vavau tribe, but the Aganoans could have possibly gotten something together. Again, they had an idol, but they just completely broke apart. Phoebe and Rowan were a duo at this point in the game, and Rowan had an idol. Kat and Christy were a bit on the outside and never had the best relationship with Rowan. So the original Vavau people decide to put their votes on Phoebe, leading to Rowan handing his idol over to Phoebe, allowing Phoebe to nullify 5 votes against her. However, what he didn't realize is that Kat and Christy flipped against them and made a really dumb move by putting their votes on Rowan. Now, while I'm calling this a dumb move, Rowan doesn't do any better here. He votes for Kat himself, meaning Phoebe was the only person here to vote correctly, putting her vote on Sue. And if Kat and Christy weren't being idiots, they could have gotten Sue out of the game and come into the next vote at a 4-4 tie, where they possibly could have gotten the numbers. However, instead what happens is Rowan essentially just idles himself out of the game. Now we're moving on to number 7 with a tribal from Australian Survivor 2017, and that is the Tessa blindside at the final 9, which is probably one of the craziest votes in Survivor history, being a 3-2-2-2 vote. So the context here is, after the last vote, Henry was blindsided. After a new majority alliance was put into place, a 6-person alliance, with Lockie, Tara, and Ziggy being on the bottom. So the majority here decides to split the vote, 3-3, between Lockie and Tara, and unknowingly to them, Ziggy also adds her vote as well to Lockie. 4 votes for Lockie, 3 votes for Tara, and 2 votes coming from Lockie and Tara for whoever they decide to throw their vote on, which ends up being Sarah. However, Luke and Jericho become really worried about Tessa. She's a pretty strong player, and she was starting to build a relationship with a close ally of theirs in Michelle. So Luke and Jericho decide to try to flip the vote here. However, if they're the only two to flip their votes, it becomes a 3-2-2-2 vote where Tara goes home, as they were 2 of the votes that were going towards Lockie. So what they need to do is convince one of the people voting for Tara to flip over to their side. And they were able to get Sarah. Sarah flipped her vote to vote for Tessa, making this a 3-2-2-2 vote where Tessa gets sniped out of the game here, which, I mean, ends up being a pretty bad move for both Sarah and Luke as they're the next 2 to go. But the vote itself was extremely fun and was kind of a final outing for Luke, who was such a great character through the season. This was pretty much the last move he was able to make. Now for number 6, we're going to be returning to Survivor South Africa Philippines, but this time we're going to be talking about the final 9 vote, which involved 3 idol plays and a 1-1-0-0 tie. Now this was a bit more of a dynamic tribal council that also had a really crazy result here, even though it did continue the pagonging with Shanae going home. But coming in for the last vote, Werner's alliance now has the majority of 5 in a group of 9. And they also had 2 tag-alongs in PK and Tony, while Palessa and Shanae were in the minority. But coming into tribal, PK, Palessa, and Werner all had idols, and the majority decides to turn against PK, while still leading PK and Tony on to vote for Shanae. PK learns of this blindside and decides to put his vote on Werner along with Palessa, while Shanae votes for Tom because she just hates Tom at this point. So before the votes are being read, Palessa gets up first, plays her idol. Immediately afterwards, we get PK standing up, playing his idol, and at that point, obviously Werner knows that, well, they could be voting for me, so Werner gets up and plays his idol as well. So we get 3 idols played here, where PK nullifies 5 votes against him, and Werner nullifies the 2 against him, leading to the 1-1 tie between Shanae and Tom, which does sadly lead to a somewhat boring revote where Shanae just goes home. But the tribal itself here was more interesting than the ones I've talked about previously, and also the vote was crazy enough to put it here at number 6. Now we're on to number 5, which comes from Australian Survivor Champions versus Contenders. And this could have been the first tribal where Matt Dyson gets voted out. But instead, we're going to the second tribal where Russell Hantz gets voted out with an idol right around his neck. And again, this was a pretty crazy tribal. I mean, we have Russell being really cocky as he normally is. Again, having an idol around his neck, getting into arguments. But at the same time, we have other conversations going on as well, with Moana trying to get the votes to get Russell out. So then by the time we get to the vote, it becomes a 4-4-2-2 vote, where Russell and Jackie are tied at 4. And these votes are just all over the place. I still don't fully understand what happened here, but from what I gather, most of the men voted for Jackie as they thought Jackie was going to go home, because obviously Russell had an idol, so they can't vote for Russell. Moana was able to get Shane, Sharon, and Sam to all vote for Russell. Jackie and Monica were kind of on the outs at this point, so I think they were just voting for Shane, just trying to survive. And then we had Lydia and Russell who voted for Damien, and this is the part that I really don't get. I mean, I understand Lydia voting for Damien, as Lydia was shown to be thinking of Damien as a liability, but I don't really get why Russell voted for Damien. Especially because if Russell voted for Jackie, Jackie would have gone home. So really, he had multiple chances to save himself here. He could have voted for Jackie, Jackie would have went home. He could have played his idol, he would have been safe as well. But instead, instead he gets voted out on the revote in 9-1 vote. Now we're moving on to number 4, which is another tribal from Australian Survivor, this time from Australian Survivor 2017. And it's once again the second tribal council of the season, with this one being the Adam blindside, which might be one of my favorite episodes of Australian Survivor in general. And the entire episode builds up to this really awesome tribal council where, I still don't understand what fully happened here, where we have 12 people on this tribe. Adam seemed to be the person who built the majority alliance and planned to vote out AK. However, everyone suspected that AK found an idol, so Adam got really paranoid and got 5 of his other allies side with him to go for Annalise. But Tara got sketched out by Adam's paranoia and decided to flip to Lockie's side, giving that side the majority. And also with AK on board there as well, they decide to vote for Adam. So we go into tribal here with both sides deciding to split their votes for some reason, even though neither side had the numbers to split their votes. And this leads to a 5-4 to 2-1 vote, where we also get AK playing his idol, which was not even shown to the viewer that he had an idol. But yeah, he plays it for Jared to gain some loyalty. And then we have Adam go home at the first tribal council here, which is ridiculous, as coming into this season, Adam was a pretty high winner candidate for me. I mean, he just seemed like to have this Boston Rob sort of feel to him. And then he was also a professional poker player. He was the leader of his alliance. But I think the paranoia just got the better of him and he was eventually just taken out here. Now we're moving on to number 3, which also comes from Australian Survivor, this time from Australian Survivor 2016. And this could have easily been number 1 if it wasn't for the fact that this was a non-elimination episode. And it is the double tribal from episode 5, where Nick and Connor are voted out and swap tribes. The tribal's amazing in almost every single way, but to give context here, we have these 3 tribes on this season where the sole winning tribe gets immunity while the other 2 tribes vote someone out. Now both of these tribes are setting up blindsides, where we have the Vavau tribe trying to blindside Nick after he just comes off as really sketchy, while the Sinapu tribe is just completely all over the place. And we arrive here at tribal where both tribes are sitting side to side and have to do tribal together, which from the Vavau tribe, again, it was pretty tame. Nick was getting blindsided, so everyone's being pretty cagey. But the Sinapu tribe, this was way more dynamic. I mean, here we had Kylie, who was the clear outsider. However, she had an idol, which, by the way, she decides to stupidly announce to everyone at tribal that she has the idol. Again, in front of the other tribe. But her having the idol led to Connor and Flick wanting each other out after Connor realizes that Flick's been talking about getting rid of him. So Connor decides to get the guys together, plus Kylie, to get Flick out. But at tribal, Connor decides to, again, in front of the other tribe, reveal the entire tribe dynamics, leading to Matt getting really pissed off and flipping his vote at the last second, causing a 3-3 tie. And then on the revote, Matt flips back, but guess what? Sam flips as well, causing another tie. And we're so close to going to rocks. However, they were told before the votes were revealed that they would be swapping tribes instead of being voted out. So I think because of this, Connor decides to just let it go and agrees to be voted out, where he's voted out in a consensus. And again, this would have been incredible if they went to rocks here, if this was a real tribal council. That's, again, why this is at number 3 instead of number 1. If they did go to rocks, this would be number 1. But I barely even mentioned Nick's blindside as well, which was a pretty fun blindside. Again, not as fun as the other vote, but again, this has been set up for the last 5 episodes pretty much, and it pretty much culminated here. But again, the potential rock draw here is the main thing here, especially because it could have happened because 2 people flipped sides on the revote. I mean, it's a completely crazy tribal that is fantastic to watch. Now we're moving on to number 2, which comes from Survivor South Africa, Philippines. And this is another pre-merge tribal council. And you know what I was saying about rock draws? Yeah, we got one here. It's really ridiculous to me that we had a rock draw on the 2nd episode of the season at the final 17. And we had just come out of the Sheamus blindside, which was a fantastic boot on its own. But this is a rock draw. This rock draw has to be on the list. So immediately after the Sheamus boot, we have pretty clear alliances. We have an alliance of 5 led by Tom, which includes obviously himself, his closest ally in Neil, a duo in Annalise and Shanae, and Ace, who's just kind of a tag-along, while we also have the 3 in a minority in Palessa, Vusi, and Josie. However, during this episode, Palessa was able to find an idol clue, but not the actual idol itself. So she goes to Ace, shows him the clue, making him believe that she has the idol. And for some reason, he decides to flip, causing a 4-4 tie once we get the tribal council. And also, guess what? He doesn't flip on the revote for some reason, even after finding out that Palesta was lying about the idol, as he was expecting her to play the idol during that tribal. What's also great about this as well is that the person who gets rocked out of the game is Neil, who during this tribal was elected leader of the tribe. And also with the elimination of Neil, this completely flips the power dynamic of the tribe, where this former majority alliance of 5 is now left to only 3 in Tom, Annalise, and Shanae after Neil is taken out and Ace flips. Meaning that the underdogs here now have a 4-3 majority. So, I mean, come on, this is a ridiculous tribal. This had to be on the list. And now we're down to number 1. The number 1 tribal council in international Survivor history, to me, comes from Australian Survivor, Champions versus Contenders. And my choice here is the Final 9 vote, where Matt Rogers is taken out in a really fun way. Now, I really debated whether this should be number 1 or not, because most of the tribal before the actual votes are cast, it's fine. It's okay. But the reason why I have it at number 1 is because really the tension that was built up from previous episodes where Benji has been wanting Matt out for at least the last couple votes. It looks like he's finally going to get away with it here. But then Sharn, who's one of Matt's closer allies and a close ally of Benji as well at this point, openly has an idol that everyone knows about and pretty much has the play at this tribal. And also at the same time, Matt has an idol himself. But before tribal, Benji tells Sharn that votes are going to be going on to Matt. So after the votes are cast, Sharn gets up, goes and plays her idol on Matt, thinking she's going to save him, which alone is fantastic. That would have been fantastic if that was the only outcome. As Benji's big move, the blindside Matt Rogers here, pretty much at the last time you really can at the final 9 here, where he has a very solid group of 4, could be thwarted here by Sharn's idol play. Though, I mean, to be fair, Benji had an idol himself, and if he really wanted to, he could have played it on Brian, making it a no-vote tribal council, and then on the revote, someone like Sharn would go home. But still, you can just see the shock on Benji's face. It's like his plan's about to go to ruins, and out of nowhere, he just speaks up and tells Sharn that it's the wrong move to play the idol on him, and that votes are going her way, and that the votes are split between Matt and Sharn, which makes no sense considering there's not enough votes to do that. But Sharn believes it. Sharn believes it, and she decides to change the idol play to herself instead of Matt, which I thought was really innovative gameplay from Benji to actually just speak up in the middle of tribal and just say something. But this causes Matt to be a bit weirded out, but he still doesn't play his idol for some reason. And then we get to the votes where obviously Sharn finds out that Benji was lying to her, when we get 4 votes Matt, 4 votes Brian, 1 vote left, and the final vote comes out and it's Matt Rogers. It's really a great tribal council. I mean, Matt Rogers was pretty much dominating the game up to this point, and if he had made it past this tribal, I think it's very likely that he dominates the rest of the game. But to be taken out in a 5-4 vote with an idol in your pocket after your ally initially plays an idol for you, but then later changes her mind, it's really fantastic. And it's something that I think has to be number 1 for me, as I was a big Matt fan. I really respected his game plan. I was really rooting for him at this point in the game. And I just found this so riveting, the fact that he didn't play his idol after all this. So yeah, it's got to be my number 1. So there we go. Those are my 10 favorite tribal councils from international Survivor history. And there were a lot that didn't even make this list. And I do wish I could fit some older tribal councils into this video, but to be honest, I don't think it would be a genuine sort of thing to include them. So when I was making the shortlist for this video, there were only a couple older votes that were even in the running, namely being the final 5 vote in season 1 of South Africa, and then like the final 7 and final 5 votes from South Africa season 5. But again, while the results were good, it's just the editing and the pacing and everything just wasn't there. So it is what it is. I will probably make a video similar to this for US Survivor down the road, but that's for the future. So yeah, that is everything I have to say in this video. Those are my top 10 tribal councils, international Survivor history. Thank you for watching.